Thanks everyone for tuning in today. Yeah, so as Gabriel's mentioned, I'm really happy to be here and sort of give you some insights as to sort of the career path or what you need to do to be a working professional economist. I actually wish that someone had done this when I was sort of at a younger age and embarking on studies in economics. Just a bit more background about me, just so you know, sort of, if you've got, just to give you some idea about questions to ask me. So I've had more than 30 years working as a professional economist. As Gabriel said, I've covered both public and private sectors, micro and macro. I've done analysis, advisory, policy recommendations, and spent the bulk of my career in financial markets covering Australia, excuse me, and New Zealand. But I had a good almost 10 years experience in various public sector roles as well. I think it's quite timely that Gabriel's actually organised this particular economics roundtable or seminar, because I think more than any time that certainly I can remember in my professional career, it's probably now the best time to be an economist. So if you are serious about using your studies and graduating and going through and looking at tertiary qualifications in economics, the prospects for jobs are really good. And I say that because while the demand for economics professions has remained steady to rising, the supply of economists is actually falling. As a discipline, it's studied far less in secondary education, and there's less people studying economics in tertiary education. Still people doing it in the tertiary sector as parts of, say, a broader business degree, but those graduating with a qualification that actually sort of readies them for a profession in economics is becoming less and less. So to use economic parlance, demand remains steady or rising, but supply has actually been falling. So this is a brilliant time, probably the best time I can remember, to actually endeavour to seek a path as an economist. And I think given what we're seeing globally at the moment with respect to what's happening to trade policy and certainly sort of challenges to sort of economic generalisations and rules as we see it and as we're taught it, I think there'll be even more of a demand for professional economic services. Just before I take questions, I just want to say that, if you are an economist, it's not just, say, working in a bank or working in a treasury. You can be a health sector economist working in the health sector. You can be an academic economist. You can be working in a policy advisory arm of government, whether it's a line agency or a central agency. You can be working in a private business, small, medium, or large. If you think of the organisation, the chances are they've had or have an economics position, whether that's Telstra, Qantas, BMW, a bank, Department of Treasury, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Department of Premier, Department of Transport, Department of Labor, ABS. I even spent a time as a consultant back in then what was Coopers and Lybrand. It's now PricewaterhouseCoopers, doing database and spreadsheet modelling for their health sector team when I was first out of uni. So there's lots of things you can be doing with an economics degree. There's also environmental economics and the impact of microeconomics in terms of economics and psychology has a place in marketing, in advertising, but also from around about 10 years ago, it's a much bigger field now, that economic psychology and challenging some of those underlying assumptions you were taught in Micro 101 around utility maximisation and a few other things. So there really is a lot of scope for economists to work. I'm happy to take any questions. As I said to Gabrielle, nothing's off limits here. This is about your career. This is about, you're making right decisions now. And as I said, I wish I'd had someone to sort of, answer a few of my questions when I was a lot younger. So feel free to please ask me anything. I don't mind if it's about my career, if it's about, what you're interested in, if it's about pay grades, if it's about sort of various employers, or if it's about sort of, maybe a path to take. Just briefly, I'm really lucky, actually, that I got a start in the public sector. And I think, if you start in the public sector, whether it's a Treasury body or the Bureau of Statistics or the Reserve Bank or even a Labor Department, it's giving you foundational data analytics skills that are very well regarded, not just by the public sector employers, but also the private sector as well. I mean, I spent a lot of time as an economist analysing Stats New Zealand, ABS, OECD, RBA, RBNZ, and other data sources, and to actually have an understanding of the fundamental calculation and derivation of the data is really, really important. In terms of the skills, I think that really help us economists. Obviously, it's analytical skills, so you want to have good numeracy skills. And don't worry if you're not great at maths. These skills can be learned and refined over time. I was never a great natural mathematician. I had to punt away and plug away at it, but I got there. But the other thing you really need is really good communication skills. It's no good being able to actually analyse the data and be the best data analyst if you can't present on that data in a verbal setting or write it down in a policy setting. So just another piece of advice, you need to have really good written and verbal communication skills. And then one good thing about being an economist is you can be an introvert, you can be an extrovert, you can have a penchant for the data, you can actually like the writing, the policy analysis. There are roles out there that will suit you. It's not something that, you may think of certain careers as being pigeonholed by certain personality types. It's not the case at all with economics. I'm certainly not a traditional economist in the way I've approached my my view of a few things, or certainly what I do outside of my economics life. So don't feel that you need to be a certain personality type to actually succeed as an economist. And in fact, if you can bring thinking that's outside the square, and you can actually bring a new point of view to an economic problem, you'll be valued highly by an employer. Anyway, I'm going to stop there, Gabrielle, but happy to take questions. I can either moderate or I can let you moderate.
You can moderate.
Okay. Fire away. Everyone's a bit shy, Gabriel. Why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first then. All right. Yeah, I think you've talked about a lot of this. So let's say, just for any students currently, any students in high school, what would you recommend them to do in the next few years in order to sort of get ahead, and set them up really well for a really successful career in economics?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, let's start with, listen. You're getting in. You like the economics. You like the discipline. You like asking the questions. You like actually finding the answers. You want to know how the world works, which is basically a good start to be an economist. But let's say your maths is not quite where you'd like it to be. What you can do is matrix algebra, calculus, differential, integral. They're really important if you're going to start looking at beyond undergraduate studies in economics, when you start getting things to like production and consumption functions, or also econometrics as well. So really start looking at sort of your algebra, your linear, your matrix, but also your calculus as well. They're probably the things to get started. If it's your written skills that are letting you down, go on and do a business writing course. Seriously, a business writing course is the best thing you can do. It'll teach you to write concisely. One of the things I remember when I was both an undergraduate and starting as a postgraduate, it was the shotgun approach to sort of, writing essays. Is you want to put everything in you can to make sure you get as high a mark you can. And from my time when I was actually an examiner and a tutor, again, this is in the latter years of when I was doing my postgraduate work. What really I thought the best students did was actually provide the most concise answers that actually hit the nail on the head without going off onto unnecessary verbiage. So do a business writing course. If you also are serious about being an economist, you will need to have at least a bachelor's degree with a major in economics. You will get employed with a bachelor's degree, and what you can do if you really want to get the workforce is go into the workforce and then study part-time, or you can then go and do an honours. But if you're enjoying your bachelor's degree, then I would recommend go straight and do your honours year, get that done, and then go into the workforce. It's your choice whether you want to do a master's. You don't need a master's to get a career in economics. And in fact, as I said, because the supply of economists is actually drying up, it was a case probably 15, 20 years ago that was qualification inflation, was what we used to call it. You had to get a master's degree to get ahead. Not really anymore. Basically, some of the best economists I worked with really only had bachelor's degree. There was one particular economist I worked with in the public sector. He was sharp as a tack, and he just had a bachelor's degree. And his view was, well, the people who needed higher degrees weren't good enough to get a job with their bachelor's, which I thought was a bit cheeky. But but at the same time, I mean, if you want to study more and more, and I would particularly say, certainly, I would probably recommend doing honours, because you're exposed to greater amounts of theory that you'll get in undergraduate degree, and it will just actually widen your toolbox a little bit. Now, if you don't like the idea of studying a full year in honours, you can go to a graduate diploma in economics, which will cover the same subjects as you do in honours. You can just do a little bit more time, which is what I did. I worked full time and studied part time when I did my postgraduate qualifications. I went straight into the workforce with my bachelor's degree. and basically got the money coming in and then decided to do some work. That's basically what happens in the US. The Australian system's a bit different, where you tend to sort of have more people going through and doing honours potentially and then going out into the workforce. The other thing you'll find, you get a medium to large sector employer, it's entirely likely they will pay for some of your studies as well. So that's the other thing to think about. You have to pay HECS fees, but if you stay with an employer for more than a year, the chances are they'll actually fund part or all of your tertiary education if you choose to go and do higher education. So that's probably what I recommend formally. Informally, I would recommend, if you want to be a macroeconomist, if you want to be a financial markets economist, sign up and get the Reserve Bank Bulletin every quarter. It contains essays as I've written on in non-technical and technical terms. You can get the quarterly statements of monetary policy. Sign up for the Federal Treasury's roundup paper as well. If you want to get into competition policy and do more micro work, the Productivity Commission and the Competition Commission also has papers and stuff that are freely available. So just get online and start looking at some papers. They don't have to be particularly technical papers, just to work out if you actually would want to do that sort of work or be in those sort of sectors. The other thing I would recommend you do, and is, if you don't have it already, is really, you're probably doing this already and probably doing this to a high degree, but focus on your Excel skills. Focus on your modelling skills. If you're really into the econometrics, have a look at eViews, have a look at Python, have a look at some of that statistical software. You probably are doing that maybe in some of your econometric type courses, but if not, just have a look at it and start to whet your appetite with that, because you will be using those, because the chances are, when you start off your career, you will be getting a bit of a more data numerical role than a more of an advisory role. So you will be crunching a lot more numbers. The other thing I would recommend you do, and you may be doing this for your assignments as well, is start looking at or getting to know the ABS and Stats New Zealand websites as well. The fact is, you'll be looking, if you're a macroeconomist, you're looking at labour force, you're looking at GDP, you're looking at CPI. If you're a microeconomist, you're going to be looking at some of the things to do with wages, for example. HILDA study, Household Income and Labour Dynamics, that comes out of the Melbourne Institute. These are all data sets you want to start having a look at. Now, you don't have to look at all of these at once. You can sort of basically say, what's the area that I potentially want to work in, and then basically focus where you want to go. You don't have to look at everything that I've told you right now. Back to you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah, that's very detailed. I think Jatin has a question.
Hi Joshua. I just had a question. You said we should have a look at papers and stuff that are related to what we want to work in. Um, how would we find what we want to work in, and what would you recommend we do to
Yep.
find different sectors?
Yep. Firstly, it's okay. So think about the studies that you're doing. Are you enjoying microeconomics more? Are you enjoying macroeconomics more? Do you enjoy labour economics? Do you enjoy a bit of the financial market stuff? Do you like sort of economic history? Do you like environmental economics? Do you like development economics? Really focus on, I think, initially the point to start with is working out what's really excited you in what you work, and then go from there. And that's probably the best way to then work out what you want to look at in terms of what papers you want to look at. So if you're into development economics, for example, you can then look at the World Bank website. You can start looking at the OECD. You can start looking at the Bank of International Development and those sort of things. Really focus on your interest, because if you think about it, if you're dialing into this webinar today, you're probably already thinking, I'm thinking about a career in economics. So I would recommend starting with your interests. Because the fact is, you're going to spend 2/3 of your waking life working at whatever career you choose. So if it's particularly in economics, start with the things that you like the most, and then work it down. And if you don't really know what you like, maybe just have a look at some micro publications, ACCC, Productivity Commission. Maybe ask your lecturers if it's more macro focused. Have a look at the RBA's publications. These are all freely available online, and I would think once you start delving that, you'll actually find other things that it will help you. Yes, I want to go down that road, or actually maybe that's not for me. The other thing you can also do as well is probably reach out to these organisations. You can reach out to the RBA. They are very much engaged in trying to get more people to study economics at a secondary and tertiary level. So, I think they'll be more than happy. And if people actually, and I'm happy to, after this seminar finished, Gabriel, if you want to send me an email and people have some sort of follow-ups, I'm happy to sort of provide some contacts at some institutions that people can actually sort of road test if they like, just to help them make their decisions. I hope that answers your question, Jayden. I'll hand back to you, Gabriel.
Sorry.
I'm saying I hope that's answered Jaden's questions, and I'll
Oh,
home back to you if there's another question.
yeah. All right. Edson.
Yup. So I've got a question about like the pay. So how economists pay like base bonus options and are economics jobs like cyclical? Like if there's a downturn, like we get laid off like bankers or like,
Yeah, sure.
miners or that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's actually. I'm glad you've asked that question because I was gonna sort of get to this. Basically, when times are good, you want to be a specialist, and when times are bad, you want to be a generalist. And the good thing about being an economist is you can be a generalist because you've studied micro, you've studied macro. I mean, I've been made redundant once in my career as an economist. It's 30 years old, and that wasn't because I was bad. It was basically because the firm decided to leave Australia during the GFC. But if you go down, the whole ship goes down. But generally, economists, because if you're working as an economist, you've ticked the box of having technical skills, and you've probably ticked the box of having verbal skills. So you are highly employable. So you are probably, and particularly if you go into the public sector, you are far more robust or immune to any downturn. You got to remember that the public sector employment, particularly for economists, doesn't tend to have a business cycle like the private sector. Probably where I'm in a bank is probably the greatest risk, but as I've been made redundant once in my career in banking, which has been more than 20 years now. So we're generally more immune as a population group or a sample group to the general population. In terms of sort of salaries, as an economist, you can earn anything from 75,000 to probably $450,000. Now, the reason for the dispersion of that salary range, it reflects a couple of things. Firstly, it's the industry you're in, and secondly, it's the experience you've got. So you could probably expect to start on maybe around about $75,000 if you come in with an honours qualification. Certainly, that's the case if you can come in as a graduate role at a bank at least, and then basically you move up from there depending on the industry you're in. Bonuses really depends on the industry you're in, and it's a wide dispersion. Bonuses can be anything from 10 to 100%. It used to be a lot more than that, but post GFC it's come down. And again, it depends on the industry you're in, how close you are to the revenue base. So, if you're in a bank, you're generally closer to a revenue base. If you're in the public sector, you're generally not as close to the revenue base. But then again, the public sector, you tend to have a little bit more job security. So, they're the things you need to weigh up. There's also, think tanks as well that are out there, hedge funds that also employ economists. Obviously, if you wanted to travel internationally, you've got OECD, you've got World Bank. Certainly the jobs market is good in Sydney. It's actually wider if you want to go somewhere like, say, for example, New York or London or even Hong Kong, for example. Or, there's agricultural economics as well. If you wanted to work on the land, you can actually work in an agricultural economics role, usually as part of an academic profession. So, but in terms of, as I said, so the dispersion in wages is wise. Just be aware if you look at sites like Seek, for example, you will get a skewed sort of distribution, if you like, in relation to salaries, and that's because the salaries are only based on the job vacancies they have on their books. It's not a complete sample. So I think there's a couple of Commonwealth job sites. It might be Jobs and Skills Australia that actually talks about more broadly the salary ranges that are actually involved. But on the whole, you will, as an economist, you will generally earn, I don't like using averages, but probably in the median, you're probably going to earn 30 to 40% more than the average weekly full-time earner. Hope that answers that question, Edson.
Yep, thank you.
Next question.
Anne.
Hi. I was wondering, in terms of like getting employed into like an economics like job or like something like that, I was wondering like how would you go about like finding jobs if it weren't for like online like job seekers like Seek and stuff?
Yeah, so you can go completely old school and look at newspapers. Commonwealth agencies will still advertise in newspapers, but mostly it's done through LinkedIn these days. So LinkedIn is probably one of the best ways to actually go for an advertised position. But a lot of jobs actually aren't advertised. They're also word of mouth. I remember, doing labour studies at one stage and actually, being told that up to 70% of all jobs actually were basically on the sort of the hidden or sort of the underground network. So what you can do, just to say there's a bank or an employer that you really want to work with, you know what you do? You get out and you get out your word processor, you turn it on, you write a letter to them or you ring them up, and you just basically say you're willing to do work experience with them, and you will probably be surprised, or you probably might not be surprised to suggest that, it might open a door for you. I mean, people like organisations like people coming to them who are actually on the front foot. So if there's a particular sort of area you want to work in, get on the front foot, get some work experience in place, because that's all going to go on your resume as well, which is going to look good coming further down the track. So that's probably one unofficial way to do it. But I think LinkedIn is probably the best way. Again, on website searches are probably the most efficient way to actually do things. You can go old school and look at newspapers. I think some of the Commonwealth agencies, as I said, still actually do that. But there might even be a Commonwealth internet agency that actually does that as well. The other thing you can do is actually look up employment recruiters that specialise in business recruiting and get them your resume in, because sometimes entry-level positions for corporations actually do go through these headhunters. So what you can do is get online again and look at headhunters that specialise sort of in business, in business hiring, and actually get on their books, because basically you're helping them out because they want the talent. If you're approaching them, it saves them a job, but it means you're on the books if there's entry-level economic positions coming around. So that's probably the 2 or 3 ways I'd recommend you guys get started.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Anna. Keep them coming.
Raphael?
Yeah, so sorry, you mentioned working in consulting in PwC. Do you mind going into that a little bit more in depth?
Yeah, sure. So what happens was, these consulting firms employ economists to actually do economic analysis, but they also employ people with economic skills to do data analysts and also to do data crunching and quantitative analysis in their consulting arms. So, for example, any one of the big four, for example, or some of the smaller firms, they're not just accounting firms. They'll actually have consultancies that actually work across different industry sectors. So it could be construction, it could be healthcare, it could be manufacturing, it could be IT, it could be sort of financial services. And so they will actually employ economists to actually go and crunch the numbers. So, for example, when I was at PwC, or what's called PwC now, I was developing spreadsheets and databases to use in their data gathering for consultancies to deal with government contracts around delivery of healthcare services. And so there was a big nursing study that I was involved in. This is so long ago now, I'm just sort of struggling to remember. But the analysis that I did there, the skills that I had using spreadsheets, using databases, crunching numbers, NPVs, IRRs, present values, looking at other people's work, seeing if they were accurate, critiquing other people's, analysis, getting involved also in tender applications as well, crunching numbers on that. So that was a lot of financial sort of business type sort of finance analysis, which I minored in. So I did a bit of work on that. And then, there's that sort of work. But as I said, that type of analysis crosses over to a whole heap of other industries. And a lot of the skills that I used and sort of developed there, I then used in the public sector in my data analysis and my economic analysis work.
So would you say as like an entry career, consulting has a broad exposure of industries?
Well, it does. If you do get a consultancy, you'll tend to find you'll go into one industry sector. It could have changed now, but they tend to basically have the way they work is each individual business unit operates as a cost center. So they generally want to keep you in their own cost center and not actually have you going out and helping other cost centers, because obviously the wage bill comes back to them. So if there's a particular industry sector you really want to work in, say for example, you really want to get involved in financial services policy or some sort of audit taxation policy, then great, go to consultancy. You might want to get involved, but I would say it's probably more of it's not a generalist occupation. I mean, you'll be getting skills you can use as a generalist, but the industry exposure you get will be quite narrow in terms of you'll be generally on that one industry sector, unless you basically go to the other industry sector, say, hey, can I work with you? You might make them happy, but you won't make your current boss happy.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Neil?
Could you please contrast economics and actuarial science for me, please?
Okay, so when you take out an insurance premium, say on a car or a house, the premiums are going to be based on actuarial tables, which is basically a very refined amount of sort of data analysis mixed with accountancy that works out risk profiles for various sort of occupations and asset classes. And then from that works out basically sort of, the risk profiles from that. So it is a very specialized part of data science that probably mixes economics and accountancy, whereas economics is a more general problem to do with basically working out what to do with scarce resources, how they should be allocated, how they should be produced, and how they should be distributed. Actuarial science is a much narrower brief. I did study with some people who were doing actuarial science. You have to really like getting into the weeds of the data, and also you have to have, I think, for that in particular, this is just my opinion, a particular personality type that really likes spending a lot of time working in minutiae on data and risk and statistical probability analysis. So I would say that is a very specialist field. None of the people I studied with, or even when I was, working, working as a tutor in the business finance sector, none of the people that I tutored with and on the staff sort of, considered economics and actuarial studies to actually cross over really much at all. Really, actuarial was a discipline in itself that you probably wanted to specialise in, maybe in start in second year or maybe third year undergrad.
Thank you.
Jatin?
Yeah, I was just wondering, do you have any recommendations for any work experiences or stuff like that,
Yep.
for high school students?
Yes, and it's really hard for high school students. This might reflect the legality of actually employing students. But so, for example, the banks will take undergraduates in as interns for usually a 6 to 8 week period. Most of the big banks do that, not just the Australian banks, but the global banks as well, like Citibank. But generally, what they do is they do career fairs at universities. They generally don't take in high school students. I don't know the reason. Honestly, I don't know the reason for that. Having said that, places like the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the Reserve Bank may offer openings for high school students. I think it's excellent that you're actually starting to think about this question at high school. Me personally, if I was in charge, I'd be happy to take high school students in for work experience to give them an idea of what it's like day to day as an economist in a given institution working. But I would actually recommend, again, if Gabriel wants to send me an email, I could probably do a bit of legwork and maybe get some contacts, maybe at the ABS or the RBA, to find out who are the best people to actually sort of ask about the potential for high school students. But I would think, as a potential employer, if a high school student is wanting to do that, that's somebody you want to keep an eye on.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Keep them coming. Gabriel, you got another question for me while you're waiting?
Think of one. So I know you've been in a lot of different industries and roles and responsibilities and have different jobs and stuff like that regarding economics. So what makes you like enjoy economics so much, right? And like what has driven you to pursue this?
Yeah, I suppose for me, I had a natural curiosity about how the world works and why the way things worked and why some things didn't work. And I probably also like writing as well. So I actually like sort of communicating. This is probably why, when I basically, after I did my consulting work, I went to the public sector and actually worked in an industry department, because I got a chance to actually apply economic theory to the problems of production and distribution. And I actually enjoyed working and recommending policies on the industry side. So, for example, in the introduction, I worked in the utility sector looking at when South Australia was privatising its electricity assets. But I had to look at it from the point of view of, was this really a competitive equilibrium for industry sectors, or were industry and households going to be paying more for the electricity? It's absolutely fascinating. It was fascinating because Australia was going to a contestable electricity market from going from natural monopolies that were government controlled. So you're applying your microeconomics around monopolies, oligopolies, you're looking at consumer theory, you're looking about producer theory. So if you like studying it and if you like applying it, that's great. But if you can actually mix a bit of the data and a bit of the written work, I think that actually makes for quite a sort of, I think it makes for sort of a quite a wholesome career, and one that actually will keep you motivated. It is an intellectually stimulating occupation, but you have to like both. I think doing the writing, but also being able to verbally communicate this is really important as well, because you will be getting up in front of bosses and peers and people to win over, particularly if you're in consultancy, to actually say why they should adopt your point of view. And sometimes that you can get shot down pretty. Can be pretty cruel. You've got some big egos in the room, but you know what? I mean, that's all part of learning. And if you go in there and say, listen, it's all part of learning, and it's not me, you'll become a better economist for it. But if you have a natural curiosity for how the world works, and why things are the way they are, maybe how they can be improved, then certainly economics is probably a good choice for you.
Sounds good. Edson, with another question.
Yeah, just another thing about the work of an economist. As an economist, would you ever face clients or like the public or like politicians or that kind of thing, or the more like an internal facing role?
Listen, that's an excellent question, and if you want more of an internal facing role, you can be an analyst that produces a written research, or then hands that to another economist, like a boss, to produce, and that can happen in consultancy. It can happen in the private sector. You tend to find when you're close to revenue generating aspects or revenue generating business, like I'm with a bank, I will speak directly to clients, make recommendations. I've spoken directly to politicians. I've been on the television. I've done radio. I've spoken to mums and dads at conferences. So it's up to you. You can have as much or as little interaction with other people as you like, and that's just a function of your personality. I mean, I'm actually naturally quite introverted, but I actually don't mind talking about some of this stuff. I've been on conference panels as well. So generally, if you want to go and work in a bank, you're going to find yourself in front of a camera more often than not. You're going to definitely find yourself talking to clients, because those clients are going to be paying the bank for your ideas. So, for example, I'll have a review on the Reserve Bank of Australia or New Zealand in terms of what I think they will be doing. I will speak to people. We can action that and put that on as a financial markets transaction. We will take that out to clients and we will try to broker that transaction to them. And if they like it, they'll do that trade with Citi, and Citi clips the ticket. So that's an example of sort of, adding to the revenue base. But there are times when I was working in university and I had my head down and bum up and I was marking papers and just doing shoots, and I was, doing my own studies. And I actually really liked that, because I could just cocoon myself in my own little office and just, produce some work and comment on other people's work. And I actually really quite enjoyed that too. So I think use your personality and work out, are you more of an economist who wants to be out there all singing or dancing? Or do you want to be an economist that's more sort of doing the data, doing the numbers, writing the results up, writing the conclusions, but then handing that over to someone else to actually sort of tell the world? But you will have some freedom to do that in your role as an economist in the private sector or the public sector. And typically in the public sector, you won't be in front of cameras. You might be meeting journalists, but more often you'll be meeting, not journalists, politicians, but more often you'll be meeting their advisors. So in the public sector, I was definitely more cocooned away from being an economist that had a role that was open to the media and to others than I am now.
Well, also, how would like technology, you've been around for like 20 years, you've seen how technology has changed economics. How has it changed like the behind the non-client facing type of work, and especially with AI now in 2025?
Yeah, so I mean, I had a boss who remembers, receiving the ABS data via a telex machine, which you guys may not know about it, but think of it as a printer. Him writing a note on a word processor, printing it out, and then faxing it off to clients. This is in the dark ages. So I think what we're looking at now, certainly more use of AI to help us generate not research ideas, but maybe test hypotheses, locate data. The problem is you've then got a question about how accurate that data is. Because previously, for example, I could go to a source like the Bureau of Statistics, and I know it's a properly resourced, thoroughly investigated and reviewed piece of data, whereas you may get something on ChatGPT for some data that may actually not be there. So AI is certainly changing the way data is accumulated. I think the questions are remaining around how the quality of that data. And I know a few law firms have actually got in trouble by not questioning the information they've received from AI. I think the other thing about AI is machine learning as well. So we're actually seeing the ability to actually interrogate data, not just through econometric type software or spreadsheets, but using algorithmic data and also machine learning data programs to actually help generate solutions using data. That's great because it means you might get quicker answers or be able to actually do far more calculations and more hypotheses. But it also means you can do more data mining to actually get an answer that suits your hypothesis, which is something that econometricians have been dealing with for many years. But the actual understanding and being able to do the mathematics, understand data, understand economic functions hasn't actually changed. I think it's just, and you need to have an understanding of that, particularly if you're looking at AI to spit this out for you. You need to know whether, if you look at a generated consumption function, for example, that ChatGPT might give you and say, well, actually, I think this function is a load of garbage, what you've given me. It actually won't work, or it's not in a form that I can actually make it work. So I think AI potentially has the opportunity to speed it up, but it also means you've got to probably be a bit more on your game as well, both not just as a producer of research and conclusions, but also as a consumer as well, particularly if you're reading sort of maybe not academic papers, but certainly policy papers that come out. So I think, it hasn't changed the fundamental skill sets that economists need, but it is adding to the toolbox and maybe replacing some of the things that we've used over the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
All right, I have a question from Ryan. So you talked about being able to present data as economists, whether it be verbal or written. As a high school student, what other courses aside from the business writing course can I do to get ahead? Would you recommend learning to use tools such as Microsoft Excel and AI? I think you talked about some of these areas already, but
Yep.
that's the question.
Yeah. So that's a brilliant question. So if you can, learn to use more Excel. Learn to use Excel if you haven't used it. The other thing that really matters is you've got to remember economics is a social science. It uses the method of science, which is observation, hypothesis generation, testing the hypothesis, and coming up with theories. And there are a lot of practicing economists that have actually forgotten that. They seem to think that anecdotes and sort of, is evidence. It's not. If you can do a course in critical thinking or logic as well, and I mean like a philosophy-based critical thinking course, one of the best subjects I did as an undergraduate, and I was forced to do this. We had to do 2 subjects out of our economics discipline. I went to a different university and I did a critical thinking and logic course, and it is one of the best subjects I've ever done because it allows me to analyze things logically, but also look at other people's arguments and work out if they're logically structured, if they are based on a robust scientific method. So that is the other thing I would recommend you doing as well. So anything to do with logic, anything quantitative skills, if you can take up sort of, basic econometrics, basic data analysis, anything to do like that, I would recommend, because the chances are you'll be doing those subjects as an undergraduate student in university. So if you can get a leg up on that, that would be great. Also, the other thing I recommend do some basic statistics if you haven't done so already. I'm talking, so hypothesis testing, hypothesis generation, t-tests. So that comes back to sort of looking at some, and basically, if you're not good at probability, start doing a bit more, maybe bunk up a little bit on your probability work in the maths in your high school you're doing as well. Because probability is something else you'll also be looking at in statistical analysis when you do get to an undergraduate level. And the other thing is, don't be put off if you find this stuff hard. This stuff is not meant to be easy. Learning new stuff is not easy. Some of you might find it incredibly easy. You might be gifted that way, but there are others, and I put myself in this box. Some of its stuff is not hard. And I've got a little axiom I use is hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work. I would much rather have a hard-working student than someone who's talented and really coasts a bit, because that hard-working student is going to have a much sharper toolbox that I can use as a professional economist.
Jatin?
I was just wondering, are there any specific books or news sources that you would recommend that would inform us well about economics?
Okay, I would recommend, if you get the Reserve Bank of Australia's quarterly statement of monetary policy, it's a really non-technical summary of economic conditions in Australia and overseas. You'll also get an understanding of what variables to look at when you are a professional economist in terms of analysing the macro and micro economies. Treasury also does, I think, still does a roundup publication. I think they do that 3 times a year. All this is federal Treasury in Australia. So those two publications are freely available on the internet. The Economic Society of Australia, also on the website, also has non-technical journals available on all sorts of micro and macroeconomic subjects. And that's really good, because that, if you find something that you like, it may be, for example, on environmental economics or development economics, that will then give you leads to actually pursue readings in other areas. But I think those two are probably a really fantastic place to start. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend, getting the Financial Review. If you can, I think probably one of the, if you want to sort of see how economic journalism is done in the top quality sense, and if you have a vote, get it. The UK Financial Times is probably the best example, followed closely by the Wall Street Journal. I don't actually rate the AFR at all. I think it's basically just a tabloid these days. But then again, they do cost money. So if you can find someone, if there's a teacher that's got a subscription or a friend that's got a subscription, you could hop on the back. That's great for learning about how economics is applied, or economics can be used, or even sort of, how, these problems are viewed by economic journalists. And it also gives you an idea about how to write about some of these things as well.
Thank you, Joshua.
No, you're welcome.
Raphael?
Hi, you've reiterated the changing landscape of economics. Like, you've given us advice on how we should seek skills out. How do you personally continue to upskill?
That's a brilliant question, and probably a little bit embarrassing for me. I probably need to upskill a bit more on AI and machine learning. That's probably in my toolbox to do a bit more of. The thing that I try to do regularly, because I'm in a large global bank, and we have economists all around the world writing not just on countries but on thematic pieces. So one of the things that I like to do is try to keep abreast of sort of read their publications, even though they're not having to do with Australia and New Zealand. They might be interrogating a particular piece of work or a theory or a piece of data analysis around trade or around consumption that I can then use to sort of better my understanding of the Australian economy, or indeed better my analysis of the Australian economy. So what I try to do is, when I can, is try to read more, just take a step back and actually read a paper that my colleagues have produced, or maybe an academic has produced, that actually isn't to do with my day-to-day work, but actually expands my horizons of understanding probably where the frontiers of economics are. Probably less relevant for you, because if you're studying economics, your frontiers will be expanding anyway by your curriculum. But it is a constant challenge, and probably, to be fair, I need to do a bit more of that. You can get a bit complacent and say my toolbox is good enough, but I think that we can all sort of expand and do a bit more. And probably, when I see younger economists around me at my work embracing sort of AI a little more enthusiastically than me, I need to know that unless I want to be a dinosaur, I need to do the same thing.
Any other question? Still got a few minutes left, maybe 2 or 3 more.
While we're waiting for a question, why don't I just purely, so the subjects that I found most interesting, I actually found micro and macro to be quite dry. It wasn't until I started doing things like industrial organization, development economics, economic growth as a subject, that the micro and the macro all started to make more sense. It wasn't just a theory, but it was actually stuff I could put in practice. All those foundational micro, macro 101, 102 formed the base blocks, if you like, for these other subjects to become more fulfilling. So if you're looking at your micro and your macro going, oh God, this is so dry, it does get better. It does actually get better. You will find that when you start to specialize, those tools that you had, consumer surplus, producer surplus, consumption functions, production functions, demand and supply curves, ADAS, ISLMBP stuff. If you haven't done already, you'll be doing it first year uni. All that stuff will actually start to make sense and will start to be used. And you'll actually find, aha, I can apply it to this particular problem. That economist applied this to that problem. You will actually start to make use of it. So just sort of try to maintain the faith. If some of that micro macro stuff itself is being a little bit dry, it will get used. Not all of it will get used, and you will find probably once you've finished your tertiary studies, your undergraduate studies, that some stuff was good to learn, but some stuff just sort of goes on the top shelf. There's other stuff you'll use more regularly, but you don't know that until the industry that you're in. So just keep an open mind.
And
I had a bit of a question about like university as well, and how like different courses that you think would be good for like economics, because I know there's like a wide variety that you can choose from. So what would you say is like the most like highly employable like degree for
Yep.
economics?
Yeah. Okay, that's another excellent question, and I don't want to in giving my answer, I don't want to dissuade you from doing subjects you might have an eye on. So don't think, oh, Josh hasn't mentioned this subject, I shouldn't do it. That's not the case. If you want to be a good generalist, what you need at university, obviously you're going to be studying a large amount of micro and macro. And what might happen is you might get an opportunity to do macro 101, micro 101, macro 201, micro 201. In your third year, do a third year micro and macro subjects. You might say, oh, I've had enough of it. But the fact is, you'll be getting a deeper understanding that you'll be able to apply to the problem that you do get if you want to work somewhere like ABS, Reserve Bank, Treasury, for example. The other thing I'd recommend doing is do an econometrics subject at university, which is basically economic data analysis using statistics. This is really powerful stuff, because sometimes, if you are an economist who can actually define an economic problem econometrically, model it, work out a solution that is applicable to a business or a government or agency, you will be more employable. So that's the other thing I'd recommend doing. If there's other data analysis subjects I'd certainly recommend doing a logical or critical thinking course. It won't be a part of the economics discipline, but it will help you in your understanding and your sort of baloney detection kit of looking at not just economic ideas, but ideas generally that, do they follow a logic, rigorous pattern of observation, hypothesis testing, and you'll be able to look at arguments and say, well, actually, this doesn't add up for ABC. Employers will definitely like that. The other thing too is, don't be scared to do don't be scared to do a course in data analytics. This comes back to the earlier question around how to keep your skills relevant. Anything around data science is also good. The other thing I would recommend probably looking at in sort of university is if you want to be a microeconomist, look at subjects that involve competition, industrial organisation. They tend to be both qualitatively and qualitatively interesting. And industrial organisation is certainly something that you would do if you want to get into competition policy. Even parts of marketing and advertising tend to use that as well. If you want to do microeconomics, I would also recommend doing, if there's any subjects offered around economic psychology or psychology of economics, particularly if you want to get into advertising or marketing or anything around that. If you're looking at going into macro economics, definitely look at an economic history subject, a broad economic history subject, because the theories that you go through, whether they be classical, Keynesian, neoclassical, new classical, new Keynesian, I've got news for you. People are still using them these days. And a lot of that stuff pops up in the academic work and in central bank work. So don't, get involved and do that as well. But the most important thing is do the subjects that you're interested in. Why? Because you're going to probably get the better marks, and they're the stuff that's going to gravitate you into and towards the careers that you want to work in. So seriously, apart from the foundations of micro, macro, and some quantitative stuff, do the stuff that interests you. I mean, apart from the logic stuff, one of my most interesting subjects I did was development economics. I learnt about growth models of economics that I've applied to public sector productivity publications that I've done. I've used that to actually help analyse work that a US economist recently did on some growth functions in looking at productivity and AI. All that stuff is relevant. And if you can do a course in economic modelling, absolutely go and do that as well.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, man.